Now, in this episode, we're going to take you on a journey profiling the life and crimes of Lonnie Franklin Jr. Now, he's a serial killer who earned his nickname by taking a 14-year hiatus from killing. And oh, by the way, his nickname was the Grim Sleeper. Like he went to sleep for almost a decade and a half. But did he really? I want to welcome in my co-host, Brandy Diamond. And Brandy, do we really believe that a serial killer just turned off his urges for over a decade and then suddenly started back killing again?
Well, I'm very interested to see if this really is the case, if police really believe that he took 14 years off of killing. Because, John, we know with all the other cases we've covered, this is typically very unusual. They have an MO, and it is highly unlikely that he stopped for 14 years.
Yeah, I was listening to an Eagles tribute the other day. You know, the band the Eagles, and one of their famous lines when they started playing together again was, "We never broke up. We just took a 14-year hiatus." And so it made me think of this. And hey, they went off on their own, did their own thing, had great solo careers and all that. They got back together. I don't believe for a minute that this guy stopped, but we'll find out shortly.
Okay, John. So today we are talking about Lonnie David Franklin Jr., aka the Grim Sleeper. Usually, John, we talk about their childhood, where they came from. I know there wasn't a lot of details about this guy, but we do know a few things. Born on August 30th, 1952 in South Central LA, California. Grew up in a working class neighborhood. Arrested, the one thing we do know about him, arrested for auto theft at the age of 16. He's eventually convicted of 10 murders, 9 women and 1 teenage girl, and 1 attempted murder, but is suspected in 14 to 25 plus more possible homicides, possibly up to 100 based on photos. Wow, John.
Yeah, after he was arrested, there was a ton of evidence, just like many of the killers that we cover, Brandy. They don't have, if they've got 10 victims, they don't have pictures of 10 victims. They have pictures of 100 victims. Where were those girls? Where were the bodies? Those are always the mysteries that we're faced with for years and years later. And we do think that his body count was substantially higher. But let's kind of, back up a little bit. We do know he was arrested at 16 for auto theft. He was a shade tree mechanic, let's say, and really did that throughout his life. We're going to talk about that later. But he got out of school and decided that he was going to enlist. So he enlisted in the 1970s. In the army and was sent to Stuttgart, West Germany. And in April of 74, him and 2 other servicemen kidnapped a 17-year-old girl at knife point.
Okay.
They took her to a remote location. They gang raped her and they photographed her. But the strangest thing, at some point during the rape, and we've seen rape victims do this to survive, she began a conversation with them and specifically him. And the conversation was basically, "I want to see you again. And can we be together again?" I really got to hand it to these women that think so quickly. They have this brutal attack happening to them. And yet they think, and can you believe it? He gave her his phone number.
Yeah.
Thinking that she did really want to be with him after being gang raped. Well, it didn't take police long to track him down, and him and his buddies were convicted of rape and kidnapping. They did serve less than a year in prison for that, and then he was dishonorably discharged in July of 75. But as we look at some of the things we do know about him, we've got that he was arrested for auto theft, and for the rest of his life, he's going to be dealing with autos and auto parts, and we're going to see how that plays into his disguise. We have
Mhm.
him attacking a young girl, raping a young girl. We're going to see how that continues all throughout his life. So there are a few of those early indicators that
Mhm.
we look at. We don't have a great deal of information about his parents, about his growing up. We don't know about any mental health issues. Or what we learn about his social skills, we really learn when he's a young adult and then an adult in life. And he does seem at times to be quiet, but if
Mhm.
you engage him in conversation, and several people said this, you engage him in conversation, he's going to go on and on and on forever. So he was, at some point or to some degree, charismatic. So
Okay.
with a lot of killers, we can really fill in their background. With him, not so much, but going into the military, getting arrested at 16, immediately going into the military, being arrested for a violent crime like rape, and then dishonorably discharged. And he goes right back to South Central LA, where
Mhm.
he was born and raised.
So, like you said, we don't know about his younger life. A few red flags already popping up, some violent crimes. Very interesting. He gives the phone number. One, I would be curious if the other two people that were with him actually saw him give the phone number and if they had any, like, hey, they're going to catch us if you do this, or was his need for attention and affection so great that he was completely blinded by what he had just done, and really thought that this woman wanted to see him again. So that's some very interesting thinking, coming from, at least from what I'm seeing about this guy. But we do know about his adult
Well,
life, John,
do you
right?
think,
Yeah, go ahead.
well, do you think that's a lack of maturity or a lack of experience? If
For sure.
I know he was arrested for auto theft, but now we're talking about a sexual crime.
Right.
And so I've got to believe that maybe, we all have a learning curve, and maybe he thought,
Yeah.
right, she was tricking him, but maybe he thought, "Oh wow, she does want to see me." I don't know.
I don't know.
I can see how some immature guys might believe that.
Yep.
Or guys that were so out there. I guess I'm flashing back to Rodney Alcala
Hmm.
as he was raping and killing that girl in the desert.
Yep.
I mean, and literally, and I think we know that he, technically it almost choked her to death and revived her twice. And she had the wherewithal to say, "Can we go back to your apartment? I
Yeah.
want to be with you."
Yeah.
Right? I just go back to that scene, which allowed her to escape and saved
Yeah.
her life.
Right. I know.
So I don't know if this is young women being smart, creative in the midst of a panic and figuring out what to do, and guys being naive enough to think, wow, she does want to be with me.
Yeah, and
Even
what
though
I just did is gonna be irrelevant,
right,
right?
even though
Like,
I
she's
raped
forgiven
her.
me, yeah. So,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think you're right, though. I think it is, like, this lack of maturity or emotional intelligence, possibly, with the fact of wanting someone, right? We know he goes and gets married. I mean,
Yeah.
what we know about his adult life, he gets a job. He works at a garage as a garage attendant and sanitation worker for the city of LA. But those roles gave him, he started to get familiar with the alleyways, the dumpsters, the landfills, which is where we know he eventually puts these bodies, right? He's employed by the LAPD in a civilian capacity as a mechanic in one of their garages until an injury led to his retirement into the late 1980s. He gets married, John, to a
Yep.
devout Christian, Sylvia Castillo, in 1986. They have a couple of kids, and he maintains a seemingly normal life. So, with no murderous activities right at that time. So I don't know. You have him committing these early crimes, thinking, giving a woman his number. He gets caught from that, but then he goes, gets a couple of jobs, goes back to LA, gets married, has a couple kids. I mean, John, how many times have we seen this?
Right.
Trying to have some sort of normalcy, maybe,
The
for
hidden
themselves.
facade, right?
Yes.
The
Yeah.
hidden facade, and he was great. We're going to talk about this later. He was great at hiding in plain sight. But I also, from a profiling standpoint, go back to evolution.
Mm.
What is the evolution of this killer? Well, he worked again as a mechanic for a little bit for LAPD. So we see that auto shade tree mechanic ability come in. He was a sanitation worker for quite a long time, which allowed him not only access to, but learning the
Mm-hmm.
alleys and the dumpsters and the landfills all over the city, which he would later use for body disposal. But I think you're right. That facade that he put up there was his devout Christian wife, and apparently he did love his kids and raised them in a normal way. So you've got this you know, facade of I'm married, I've got kids, I'm providing for them, I've got a steady job, or that's one life, and the
Mm-hmm.
other life is what he did with these girls and women for
Yeah.
years.
We know the first victim, John, her body was found in 1985 on August 10th. Her name was Deborah Jackson, Black female, 29 years old. She is shot 3 times in the chest. Now, her body is actually found in an alley near West Gage Avenue in the Vermont Slauson, LA area. Forensic would later link her death to 7 others between 1985 and 1987. So, John, like you said, the facade of being married, having kids. I mean, how many times have we seen this, right? Finding out your father's a serial killer for 20 years and you live with him behind closed doors and everything's normal and life seems normal. I think, to me, this is what we're going to start seeing is he was just, I mean, this is a lot of people between these times. But again, Black female, first victim, we know 1985.
Yeah, and his profile for victimology, at least as we looked at the victimology profile, is going to stay amazingly consistent. We've had serial killers that their victimology is all over the board, right?
Yep.
Male, female, young, old. It's absolutely all over the board. Nothing that you can track down. This is one of those killers that is going to be amazingly consistent with his victimology. And he starts with the first suspected victim here. He wasn't convicted of murdering her. This was actually before he was married, but DNA later would tie him to this crime. But Black female, young, shot in the chest. So the victimology is going to be pretty straight down the line here. Now, the first one that we know of that he is actually convicted of is Henrietta Wright, a Black female, 35. She was found dead, multiple gunshot wounds in August of 86 in an alley near the 2500 block of West Vernon Ave, Hyde Park area of Los Angeles. Well, I pulled up the maps from LAPD homicide report. He was raised and grew up in South Central LA, and all of these murders are occurring right there in his backyard in South
Mm-hmm.
Central LA. Now, that's going to play an important role a little bit later on. That's going to play an important role as the police are trying to unravel this whole case here of these women in South Central LA. Her body was found under a discarded mattress and it was wrapped in a blanket. Now, this is going to be the only one that I would say that there's any significant level of trying to hide the body.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's another that's under a mattress, but this is the only one that he wraps in a blanket and discards under a mattress. So I would say that this is one of his first couple of kills, that he's learning what he wants to do and how he wants to do it and how he wants to dispose of the body. She was barefoot, but she was gagged. So we know that he gagged her before he killed her, and she was probably killed somewhere else and dumped in the alley there. So that would also tell us he does have some mode of transportation and ability to get around. But we can see in these very first couple of kills here, um, the beginning of an evolution, the beginning of a pattern, and you think that police would be picking up on this also, but that simply wasn't the case at this time.
Well, and like you said, he's kind of getting his bearings, I think. Like you said, he's trying to hide her. I'm noticing that when we talk about the next victims, 23-year-old Barbara and 26-year-old Bernita, a gun is used. John, is a gun consistently used in this guy's
Yeah, yeah,
killings?
a
Okay.
gun and shots to the chest specifically,
Okay.
which has its own MO. Why didn't he shoot him in the head? Why did he shoot him in the chest?
Mhm.
Why didn't he wound? There's all kinds of things, but
Yeah.
yeah, he would shoot them in the chest. I think the really significant thing to me starts to jump out in killings 3 and 4. So he discarded the first couple of victims, um, put one in a wrapped her in a blanket and put her under a
Mhm.
mattress. I think he's thinking that's taking too long. I
Okay.
think he's thinking this is too much trouble.
Okay.
I think he's thinking I can do something to get rid of them,
Hmm.
but really they're just trash. So why wouldn't I just throw them out like trash? And in victims 3 and 4, wearing sparks, he just puts trash over them
Yeah.
or trash in a trash bag. Remember, what does he do for a living?
Ah, sanitation.
Sanitation for the
Yes.
city of Los Angeles.
Yes.
He's dealing with trash all the time. Do you think already, right?
Yep.
But so we're probably, as far as we know, only about 2 years into his killing.
Okay.
If he did start in 85 and there weren't prior victims. 2 years into his killing, do you think he's already feeling like I'm just taking out the trash?
Oh, not only that, I think, well, first of all, he's doing it in his own backyard. He probably picks up half of these dumpsters anyway. He knows this area. I mean, and he's used to it, right? So maybe he knows how to hide them. Maybe he knows when pickup is and where the bins are and where people are going to be looking and not looking. I mean, he is definitely using what he does for a living, in order, but he is absolutely just, I mean, the 23-year-old Barbara is found under a pile of trash,
Yeah.
and Bernita is then put in a trash bin and covered with garbage. So, he has no remorse, and he just throws them away like trash, which is just very, very interesting.
And hindsight's always 2020. My
I know.
gosh, if you had the information, about a killer and you could look at it, and go. A lot of times we go, "Oh my God, why did they figure this out?" But this guy really was leaving just some overt clues
Yep.
to kind of who he was and what he thought and what he was doing. We do know that many of these girls were women from the street. Many of them were prostitutes. Many of them were drug addicts. Many of them were crackheads.
Yeah.
I almost think, and I'm not sure, but I'm almost leaning towards that. Nobody cares about them.
Mm-hmm.
I'll
Yep.
just use them and get rid of them,
Yeah. No.
and no one's going to know any
And
different.
nobody's gonna find any. And again, maybe he's viewing them just as he's getting rid of them. But they're trash, and nobody cares about them. Nobody's gonna be looking for them. But both of those women are shot. Again, found in L.A. One under a pile of trash and one in the garbage. So, just very
So
unfortunate.
let's kind of look at his life. What is
Hmm.
he doing? How is he? It's always fascinating, Brandy. How is he living these two lives?
Right.
Right, killer
Hmm.
and trash man, but husband, father, raising children, providing for them. And so I started to look a little bit into what was his life like. The neighborhood. I thought this was fast. Okay, South Central LA is a very, very poor neighborhood.
Mhm.
A very poor neighborhood with a very high crime rate. A
Yep.
very poor neighborhood with a very high crime rate in the 1980s, and it was also ravaged like so many of our communities. Oh my gosh, I remember working in inner city Dallas in the 80s, and the drugs and the gangs was just overwhelming. And it was like that in South Central LA. So that's a kind of a painting a picture of the neighborhood for you.
Mhm.
The neighbors called him, and I've never heard this term before, an off the books retailer.
Off the books retailer. Oh, like a bookie, like doing a business without keeping any kind of record, but
Yeah,
getting
yeah.
money, but yeah, like
He yeah,
cash
he was
dealings.
he was basically a thief,
Okay.
and
Yep,
and
yep.
he was stealing things
Okay.
and then selling them back to the
Oh.
community at a really cheap price, or in some cases, giving them to community members. And there were multiple people that said he was very charitable and very generous, especially to the neighborhood's poorest and the elderly.
Mm,
But in
interesting.
addition to just being a thief and acting as kind of a off the books pawn shop or something like that, he also ran a chop shop where
Mm,
he, because he was a mechanic, remember, we keep seeing, I mean, this guy really was hiding in plain sight here. We
sure.
keep seeing the sanitation life, we keep seeing this mechanic life. And so neighbors knew they could go to him and get their car fixed off the books,
Mhm.
because he had a chop shop. He would steal parts, and apparently he had a very big inventory. One lady said she brought a car in there that wasn't a real common car, and the mirror had got knocked off in an accident, and he disappeared for a few minutes and came back with the exact mirror. But they know that they could go there, get their car fixed. But on the other side of him, he was also very charitable. He would keep tires in stock and change tires for people and not charge them, and help elderly people out with their cars. It's just a very, very
It's
strange
bizarre.
situation. Some neighbors would say, hey, if I needed a TV or a computer, I'd go to him and
Hmm.
he'd get it for me really cheap. And most of the time, they were still in the box.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah.
That's
So
really
twice,
interesting.
now twice he was convicted of felony possession of stolen property.
Wow.
But you got to remember this neighborhood. Is anybody concerned about it?
Yeah, no,
Not
they're not.
really.
No.
They're getting it for free. They're getting it for cheap. And
Yep.
one neighbor said, well, just because he's a thief doesn't make him a killer.
John, also, this is an area where, people mind their own business. If there is
Right.
murders, killings, shootings, they're like less likely to talk, right, to police. They don't
Right.
want to get involved. So they are, and again, they are survivors out there, right? Some of them, they need their car fixed. They need these things to go to their job and survive. I mean, they're survivalists out there. So getting these parts for cheap, for free, they probably just overlook where they're coming from. But I do find it interesting that his behavior, on one side, he is targeting these vulnerable women, right?
Yep.
Killing them, on the doing charitable things for neighborhood folks, like you said, hiding in plain sight. Yeah, a married man, so he's gaining the trust of the community. And, being like, I'm there for you kind of guy. But then again, John, we're getting into that profiling of MO. What's he
Yeah.
really doing on his free time?
No, you're exactly right. I think you hit it on the head when you said gaining the trust of the community, and many in the community, liked him. They kind of knew him as a character in the community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of our neighborhoods kind of have those,
Sure.
right? But he, from a profiling standpoint, we're into 4 victims that we know for sure. And again, he's staying very consistent with his victimology: young, black, female, many times prostitutes, drug users, but girls from the neighborhood who disappear in the neighborhood
Mm-hmm.
and then reappear under a trash
Yeah.
pile or trash bin. He targets vulnerable women, often giving them a ride. Several of these girls, we're going to find out later, were leaving their house and asked their family, I'm going to the store. Do you need me to pick up this? Or do you need me to pick up that? And that was the last time they were seen. He
Mm.
would pick them up in his orange Ford Pinto.
Okay.
Now,
Very distinct car.
very distinct,
Interesting.
and it had red racing stripes.
Oh, what?
Now, this is really significant because this car was actually identified on more than one occasion.
Mhm.
And yet, how much more obvious can you get? We're not talking about, well, it was a white sedan.
Yeah.
Well, how many white sedans are in LA? I mean, people identified this orange Ford Pinto with the red racing stripes, and yet
Interesting.
it seemed to disappear in the crime of South Central LA. He would sexually assault the victims, rape them, and murder them. His primary weapon was a .25 caliber, and he'd shoot them in the chest at close range. So he'd abduct them, rape them, shoot him in the chest, and dispose of them. For some of the killings later on, he did shift to strangulation for whatever reason, but that was primarily, it was shooting him in the chest. Now, we do know that he used a Polaroid camera, like many, many serial killers of his day. He would photograph his victims nude, whether they were conscious or unconscious, photograph them during and after the assaults, and kept over 1,000 photos and videos as trophies that police would later find in his garage, along with some ID cards from the victims, panties from the victims. So he was a big souvenir collector from a serial killer standpoint, keeping the photos, keeping the panties, the ID cards, and we'll find out later he even showed some of these to people.
Wow. I mean, crazy driving a bright orange car with red stripes. I mean, talk about blending in and not I mean, just right in front of everyone's face with it. So
Yeah,
very
it's
interesting.
when I look at the whole sanitation worker, they're left in areas with trash over them. I look at descriptions of a really outstanding car. I look at everybody knew he was the off the books retailer in the neighborhood, but all of this is really blending in with the crime in the neighborhood,
That's right.
and
Yep.
nobody's noticing.
All right. Well, we do have another victims, John, 5 and 6. 26-year-old Mary Catherine Lowe was found dead on October 31st, 1987 in the 8900 block of Western Avenue in Gramercy Park, LA. Her body was dumped in an alley and covered after being shot. We have Larica Denise Jefferson, 22, was found dead on January 30th, 1988 in the 2000 block of West 102nd Place in Westmont, LA County. So again, 2 more victims in 87 and 88.
Yeah, and Lowe, October 31st, it was Halloween night, by the way.
Yep.
And she was going to a Halloween party. And that was the last time that she was seen. So the killer is continuing his killing strike with victims 5 and 6 here. We don't see a dramatic escalation in the timing or the timeline of these killings. They're still pretty spread out, which leads me to believe he's still kind of evolving, still kind of finding his way.
Yep.
His neighbors called him a character. Right.
Okay.
And I think we all have those in our neighborhood. There's certain, I know one that lives down the street from me. That's probably a nice thing to call him. But we see police cars at his house all the time. We see fire trucks, ambulances. And when I've seen him on the street, I think I'd call him a character. So the neighbors called him a character, but they said he was kind. And he gave gifts to people, neighbors and friends, and offered help. And so many people said he loved his children and took care of his family. I think one quote I saw said something like, his family never lacked for anything. Now, you got to remember, this isn't a very, very poor area of
Mhm.
Los Angeles. And if those neighbors are saying, the Franklin family, they're they're doing okay.
Hmm.
Um,
Interesting.
yeah, there were some folks that said he was very conversational, especially about sports and get this, true crime shows.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, true crime. And he would talk about that. But there were some people that said, when I asked him about these girls disappearing, he would quickly change the subject.
Hmm.
So he didn't want to talk about that. He seemed to always be willing to share a beer with the neighbors. And like I said, he helped the poorest in the neighborhood and the elderly. He would change tires and make repairs on their cars for no cost. So really, really two different sides of this individual.
Hmm.
One that the neighbor, the community, maybe that his wife and children were seeing,
Okay.
and then one that was totally different and hidden and dark. And don't you think by being a really good husband, father, neighbor, it helped hide his dark side?
Well, John, not only that, but something just sort of came to me, and as I was thinking about this, and he's a sanitation worker, gets rid of the trash for the neighborhood, right? Tries to bring back good back to the community in whatever his own way is, right? Retailer off the books, helping, giving, that sort of thing. Do you feel like there was some sort of level of, now I don't know if we can talk about whether these were sexually motivated crimes, or do you think he's just also getting rid of the trash in the neighborhood in his head?
That's what I mean. Yeah. Do you think that's what it was, knowing that these girls were prostitutes, that they were drug addicts, crackheads, that type thing?
Yeah,
Do you think he was trying to make it better? I think
I
that's
don't know.
giving him. I think it's giving him a little too much credit.
Okay.
I think he was using the facade to hide behind, and I think he used the crime and the poverty in South Central LA to his advantage.
All right, John. Well, we've got victims 7 and 8. 18-year-old Alicia Monique Alexander was found dead on September 11th, 1988, in an alley near 43rd Place in Western Avenue in Vermont Square, LA. She had been sexually assaulted and shot in the chest. And then we have 30-year-old Anitra Margaret Washington was attacked in Gramercy Park, LA on November 20th, 1988. She is the only confirmed survivor that is actually mentioned during the trial. And she also accepted a ride from Franklin before he drove her down an alleyway where he shot and left her for dead.
Well, no. She's the only confirmed survivor, I think,
Yeah.
of the crime.
Yes.
And yeah, and I think I think she's the one, if I remember right, that gave the description of the orange Ford Pinto to police. But somehow that got lost.
What?
Somehow that got lost. How does a description of an orange Ford Pinto with red racing stripes get lost? I don't know.
So
I
do
don't
you mean
know.
lost like they never wrote it down and never looked for it, or just
I mean,
completely was irrelevant information?
no, there's certainly a record of it, so they wrote
Okay.
it down. But how did it not get followed up on?
I don't know.
Right?
Very strange.
I mean, there's some of these things, and again, not to look back decades and go, why wasn't that done? Because now we have all of the information together in one pile.
Hmm.
But we do know that there were little bits and pieces out there that were never connected. One of the things that, like I said, the neighborhood, if I was making a movie,
Hmm.
this would be a location movie. And by that, what I mean is some movies are based around characters, some movies are based around time periods, specific genres, some movies are based around location,
Hmm.
right?
That's right.
To me, this would be a location movie because South Central LA and what was going on during that time with the crime rate, with the drugs, with the gangs, helped him get away with these crimes. So the
Absolutely.
location is tremendously important. And geographically profiling this case, all the murders are occurring, and it's a very, large part of South Central LA, but they're all occurring around basically one street, Western Avenue, that is kind of the nexus of all of these areas where these crimes are occurring. And so we can see that's where the girls are disappearing. That's where the assaults are occurring. That's where the bodies are dumped. That's where, everything is going on. So, like I said, if I was making a movie, this would definitely be a location-based movie, because I think the location has as much to do with the crime as anything else. It
Yep.
just crazy high crime during the 80s, crack cocaine epidemic, and you have all of these other violent crimes going on, right?
That's
So
right.
police are responding to record numbers of robberies, rapes, murders, record numbers. They're absolutely covered up 24 hours a day with this stuff. And so you can see from a criminal standpoint how it's easier, let's say,
Hmm.
for them to get away with what they're doing when everything is crazy around them.
Yeah, there's no time for them to start tying anything together. I mean, that's what I
Right.
see, right? There's just so much going on. They don't have the manpower, the resources to go, are any of these connected? Are these just random violent crimes because of the drugs, because of the violence going on, because of the high prostitution rate in the area? And they've got their hands full. So I can see how they don't have the time to go, well, we found one over here. We found one in the trash over there. But I hope they start to do this, at least maybe getting some resources in order to find out if any of these are connected.
Yeah, and I can remember a time in the 80s where the crime was so bad,
Hmm.
and we were going from shooting to stabbing to rape to murder. Not only did we know that the other crimes kind of took a back seat, but the citizens realized it. I remember going into a store one day and talking to a store owner, and I'm about to leave and say, "Well, call me if you need me," type thing. And he goes, "Oh, and by the way, I did get robbed today." And I was like, "What?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, somebody came in with a shotgun and robbed me at gunpoint." I said, "Why didn't you call?" And he said, "With the way you guys are, how long would it have taken you to get here? The guy would have
Yeah.
been long gone. We never would have seen him again. What good is it for me to call?" So when crime is this bad in an area, in a neighborhood, it's not a secret.
That's right.
Everyone knows about it, and their life changes,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
He didn't call about an armed robbery, a guy sticking a shotgun in his face, because he knew it would just kind of, well, with everything going on.
Yeah.
Now, in the 80s, LAPD did form a task force. They were aware that young black women were disappearing. However, almost all of these young black women, as far as they knew, were chronic drug users, drug abusers, prostitutes, and other types of sex workers. They did dub the killer the Southside Slayer at one point, believing that he was responsible for stabbing and strangling at least 13 sex workers between 83 and 85. Well, was this our guy? No,
No,
no, because he
no,
was shooting him in the chest.
that's right.
So who's doing this? Well, like we've seen before, there are multiple serial killers working in the same area at approximately the same time.
Oh my
And
gosh.
by January of 86, which is right around when Franklin started killing, right?
Hmm.
Maybe 85 is
Yeah,
tied. Well, it was
85.
tied to him. And then 86 was confirmed. So right around this time, police are already looking for the Southside Slayer, who's strangling and stabbing, not shooting in the chest,
Yeah.
other
Wow.
people. Now, is this Franklin? Is this somebody else? But there's conflicting MO,
Yeah.
conflicting suspect descriptions. So the only thing that police are kind of figuring out at this point is they think they have multiple killers on their hands at the same time. On each episode of True Crime and Wine, we feature a wine break. But this wine break's very special because we're shining the interrogation spotlight on the very first wine in our True Crime and Wine Shop at Home series called The Investigation. It's our Pinot Noir, a Russian River Valley Pinot Noir. It's called Beyond a Doubt. What a great name. You're going to love it. Beyond a Doubt. It's layered with aromas of blackberry, cranberry, pomegranate, and hints of lemon zest. And it's braced with a bright acidity. Now, as many wine lovers know, the Russian River Valley is a fog-cooled climate with well-drained soils, and it's just ideal. Perfect conditions for crafting our Beyond a Doubt Pinot Noir. You're going to pick up some aromas of blackberry, spices, cranberry, maybe even some zingy cherry juice on this and black tea, but it is amazingly well balanced, bright acidity, and a great round Pinot Noir. I think you're going to enjoy it. And if I haven't mentioned it, for every bottle you purchase, $1 gets donated to the DNA Doe Project. And they're a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to helping law enforcement name unidentified remains using investigative genetic genealogy. And we've talked about genealogy before and how it's helping us clear cases, help families, and close cases, and give families closure. So we're happy to donate to that. Now, if you're interested in purchasing one of our wines or all of them in the investigation series, our listeners and viewers can click on the link in the podcast description or the bios on our social media accounts, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. They're all, of course, at JJ True Crime and Wine. So the link in the bio or in the podcast description, and you can buy one or all 6 of our investigation series wines.
All right, John. So before the break, we started talking about the task force now starting to maybe identify that there may be multiple serial killers in LA at the same time, possibly 4 or more, they believe were murdering women in South Los Angeles. I mean, unbelievable, John. I know we had a couple we had talked about already in California in a case prior to this one, but that's a lot.
Yeah, you remember around the Berkeley area, there were actually 2 serial killers, Herbert Mullen and Ed Kemp, that were killing in the same area, and the police were confusing them. And that's what was happening here. So this same scenario is playing out, but on a grander scale. Now, we eventually learned that Louis Kane committed at least 2 of those 15 or so Southside Strangler murders. But we also know that serial killers Michael Hughes, Daniel Lee Siebert, Chester Turner, and Ivan Hill also committed other murders. And it's just amazing that you had this nexus of killers that their crimes kept adding to the crime in South Central LA, which we've already well documented, and they were actually helping each other because it helped cover up each other's crimes.
That's what I was actually thinking. Like, how do you, and again, it's like they're dying in different ways. You have different, probably MOs, different ways of killing, different areas of being found. And they're really just trying to put all of this together. But as we know, and as we mentioned before the break, there's so much going on at this time that they had to put a task force together and really start to identify these killers. But John, we move on to more victims. We've got a 9th victim, a 10th victim, an 11th victim. Princess Cheyenne Bartholomew, 15 years old, was found strangled and beaten on March 19th, 2002. This is in Inglewood, California. She is found in an alley, John. Her nude body was found by a passerby in the shrubs. She had last been seen by her family on December 21st, 2001, and DNA recovered from her body would match DNA on several other victims. We've got 35-year-old Valerie Louise McCorvey was found dead on July 11th, 2003 on Denker Avenue between 108th and 109th Street in Westmont, LA County. And then we've got Janicia Lavette Peters, 25 years old, was found dead on January 1st, 2007 in the 9500 block of Southwestern Avenue in Gramercy Park, LA. She had been shot and covered with a garbage bag.
Yeah, and so again, let's kind of paint the picture for our viewers and listeners here. The last murder prior to this was 1988, right? That's the last murder we talked about, and how the task force was stymied throughout the 80s, throughout the 90s. And now we're talking about a murder in 2001. So we had this huge break,
Yep.
a about 14-year hiatus
Okay.
where we don't have the killings continuing. So what happened during this break? Was there a break? We know the police were really overwhelmed 80s and 90s, and now we're getting into the early 2000s, but we still have those 80 cases out there, right? 85, 86, 87, 88. And now seemingly this particular killer, the one that's using a 25 caliber pistol, the one that's shooting him in the chest, the one that's dumping him and leaving him like trash, is back again in 2002, in 2003, in 2007. And so now the police are back to square one, going, oh my gosh, we thought that killer was gone. We have no idea what happened to him, but now all of a sudden the killings picked up again. And I think they're starting to again look at the victimology, and they're young Black women, teens to 30s, many of them prostitutes, drug users, crack cocaine users, very optimistic targets, offered with rides or drugs, lured into, the killer's grasp with drugs or rides places. And we know that the killer took Polaroids of the victims because we're going to find them later. And as a matter of fact, he's going to be bold enough now, right? He's older. He's 15 years older. He's going to be bold enough to show some of the photos to people and even some of the panties. So our killer is getting bold, but from a geographic standpoint, he's still operating in the exact same area.
So, John, I have a question. Did anything change with him over those years? Did he move? Was he relocated something else? Did he just stay in this neighborhood the whole time?
Yeah, as far as we know, he stayed in the neighborhood. Now he's going to take a little trip that we're going to find out about, and that does match up with other murders. But the big question is here is, did he just stop killing, or did he move locations? Did he, for some reason, now start transporting the bodies somewhere else? Are the bodies somewhere in a mass grave that's not been found yet? We've seen other killers do this. The killers, Candyman down in Houston, would take bodies to a boathouse, and when that location was filled up, start throwing them just out in the swamps.
That's right.
And getting rid of them. And some remains were never, ever found again. Did he find another trash disposal method? Did he figure out maybe how to incinerate the bodies in LA's garbage incineration system or waste management system? What did he take them to another location? We've got multiple serial killers that have preferred body dump sites, and then there won't be any bodies for an extended period of time until we find another dump site, and then all of a sudden it fills in all of those gaps.
I'm thinking that if that is the case, if he did dispose of them somewhere else, pick them up, take them somewhere else, Was he doing that because he kind of knew that they were starting to tie some of these together, right? Like you said, that everybody in the community knows about this. People, things change. You know about these murders. You know people are coming up missing. So was this his shift to then not stay just necessarily in the area with his victims and move them? And how scary is it to think, John, that he could have been doing this for 14 years and who knows where they are, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, we talked about the murders in the 80s. We talked
Mhm.
about the task force in the 80s. Now we're in the 2000s.
Yep.
Now we've got a new task force. We've got new investigators, new technology, right? Over the
Yes.
2 decades, we now have new technology, and DNA is really taking hold of in the 2000s. And we're starting to use it. It's already been approved by the Supreme Court. We're really using it in law enforcement. We talk about the pre-DNA era and the post-DNA era.
Uh-huh.
So in May 2007, with the slaying of Janica Peters, 25, they linked her DNA to at least 11 other unsolved murders in LA going back to 1985. And
Wow.
in 2008, this task force goes to the media and says, we're going to offer a reward for the killer. So now they've linked the
Mm.
killings in the 2000s with the killings in the they don't know who the killer is, but they've linked them. They've got matching DNA going back, but nothing in their database. So does that make sense? They've got DNA and it's the same DNA, but it doesn't match to anyone that they've ever arrested.
Yep. Yep.
So they say, we know that it's the same killer. Oh my
Mm.
gosh, we've got a serial killer that's been killing in South Central LA for decades now. So they go on America's Most Wanted, and the case is shown, hoping to get people to come forward to make phone calls. Bill Bratton, the police chief of LAPD at the time, did a press conference and actually named this killer the Grim Sleeper because apparently he was asleep during this 14-year hiatus. And that was a nickname that actually was created by the LA Weekly, but Bratton picked it up and kind of named him. And so now people are looking for this grim sleeper, right?
Okay. Right.
There's a $500,000 reward out there.
Wow.
There are billboards with these women's pictures from the 2000s and all the way back to the 1980s. And
Wow.
and a big media campaign, right? So it was on
Yeah.
Fox. It was on America's Most Wanted. There's billboards. There's posters. A $500,000 reward. And remember how I talked about how he was hiding in plain sight?
Mm-hmm.
He literally lived down the street from a billboard, one of these billboards, offering the $500,000 reward for the killer of young black women.
Yep.
Every day he walked by posters in the neighborhood businesses about these missing black women.
Wow.
He continued to drive. He was a mechanic. He continued to drive his bright orange Pinto with red racing stripes that the one survivor described.
Mm.
And yet
Wow.
nobody noticed. During this time, he's just getting off the charts bold.
Yeah, yes.
He actually showed a friend numerous pictures of naked women that he kept in the glove box of his Pinto. And some
Uh,
of the women were conscious and some weren't, the witness said. If you're a true crime lover and collect true crime t-shirts, wine glasses, stickers, hoodies, earrings, or other fashionable items, make sure you check out our True Crime and Wine logo apparel and more at shoptruecrime.com or at the Casaro Winery website, casarowines.com. So check out our True Crime and Wine selection of all kinds of collectibles and enjoy them as you listen to our podcast of True Crime and Wine.
So we've talked about this before, showing souvenirs, bragging, saying you've been involved, haven't been involved. I don't know. I always think, do they want to get caught? You say no, right? They don't. It's not necessarily that they want to be caught and turned in. Is it just bragging? Is it just like being able to share
Power,
with somebody? Power. Share
power.
with someone what you've done type of thing, but not tell them what you've done.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, power, control, as Fred, look at me. I've got all
Hmm.
the power. Everybody thinks I've got this, wife and kids and raising this great family. And why would you have Polaroid?
Yeah.
Okay, we're not talking about pictures cut out of magazines.
Right. Right.
Anybody could have that, right?
Sure.
And could brag and, oh, I was with this woman, I was with. But when you have a Polaroid, a picture that you took, that somebody took, you were there, you got a Polaroid of these conscious or unconscious naked women, and you have
Yeah.
stacks of them in your glove box. Uh,
Unbelievable.
yeah, he lived within 200 feet of Western Avenue. Remember, I mentioned Western Avenue
Yeah.
a long time ago? In South Central LA, and the Western Avenue was the nexus of so many of the areas where the girls worked, where they did drugs, where they were picked up, where their bodies were found. He lived within 200 feet of Western Avenue.
Wow.
One woman, well, in his garage, saw a whole box of women's panties, and she didn't think anything of it. And apparently, after he was, caught and
Uh,
convicted, so many people came forward and said, oh, yeah, we knew he frequented prostitutes. Oh, we knew he frequented crackheads. So you've got him frequenting the victim group. You've got him with the victim group. You've got him in proximity to the victim group. You've got him driving the car that the only surviving victim described. You got him living within 200 feet of the main strip of where the victims are. He's
oh,
literally
wow.
living in the shadow of a billboard looking for him, and he's showing off souvenirs. You can't make this stuff up.
It reminds me of the serial killer that was a reporter, was reporting on his own crimes
His
that he
own,
was
yeah,
committing. I mean, they just, and you know what? Maybe a part of this is staying close, staying up with the investigation. He can hear everything that people are talking about. He knows what police are looking for. So, I mean, just brazen and bold, John, to just stay put, right? He didn't move. He didn't take his family and relocate somewhere else. He just, like you said, stayed in the shadows of that billboard.
yeah. And Bratton is doing everything he can to assist the media getting the word out there, try to get this killer off the street. He even released a 911 call from the 80s of a man
Mm,
saying, I saw a body being dumped by somebody, and he gave a detailed description and license plate of a van. And,
okay.
was that part of it? I don't know. We had 4 serial killers working at that time. It could have been any of them. But we do know that the task force followed up in March of 2009 with Miss Washington. And you remember she was the sole survivor of Franklin's attacks. And she described him as a black man in his 30s, which he would have been about that time. He looked neat. He looked tidy, kind of geeky, she said, with a black polo shirt tucked into his khaki trousers. Now, that could be just about anybody, but she
Yeah.
also described the interior and exterior of that orange Ford Pinto with the
Wow.
red racing stripes.
I just don't get it, John. How did they just not see that? I mean, one cop, it would just take one police officer to notice that vehicle on the road,
Yeah.
right?
And go, wow, this is
Unbelievable.
really sticking out. But like in a lot of cases, Brandy, there were missed opportunities, and they
Yeah.
missed an opportunity to catch Franklin really because his DNA was never collected, even though in 2003 he was convicted of a felony and served 3 years of probation.
Mm-hmm.
So again, he's not in jail. He's not off the street. He gets probation for a felony conviction. This is again showing how overwhelmed courts and certain
Yeah,
judges will just continue to keep offenders out. Now I know it wasn't a murder, but he could have been in jail not killing people, but
that's right.
that opportunity was missed. But his DNA was supposed to have been entered in the database with that felony conviction, but it wasn't, because just so happens that between November of 2004 and August of 2005, the probation officers didn't collect samples for people that were on uh, probation, even if it was supervised or unsupervised. So his DNA, even though by law it should have been collected,
Yeah.
never was collected. And the probation department says we didn't get around to it because we didn't have the manpower. We didn't have the resources to do it. So even though it was statutorily required,
Mm-hmm.
they said we didn't have the manpower. We didn't do it. So his DNA wasn't part of the database. So they've got
Wow.
DNA matching all these murders from the 80s to the 2000s, but they can't bring it back to anybody.
Mm-hmm. So, and I have like a question and a point about that. So, when the rape happened, right? Of the three, when we talked about when we started this case, he was
In
convicted of the rape
74.
in 74. But did they do a rape kit test? I mean, was that? I mean, I assume that was a thing at that
Well,
time, right?
it might have been, but you got to remember, in 1974, the databases weren't good. They weren't
Right.
shared. That was in West Germany, so it wasn't even in the United States.
Yeah.
There's no way that they were
Okay.
gonna go back and have that evidence. But luckily, and I talked about DNA and how important it is, and our partnership there with the wine sales. Um, the the police didn't have DNA linking Franklin to all these murders. They had the DNA, but they weren't able to bridge the gap, right? So
Right.
they didn't have his DNA from the 74 rape. They didn't have his DNA from the 80s murder. They had it, but they had no link to him as an individual.
Got it.
Right.
Okay.
So
Right.
it's like you've got all of these linked together. You know it's the same killer, but you don't know the killer because you don't have that sample from that individual. Well, they started running what we call familial DNA,
Okay.
trying to see was anyone in the system that would be a relative of the killers, right?
Okay.
What did anybody have DNA that is so similar to the one collected in all the murders that they could figure out who the killer was? And guess what?
What?
They actually did.
Mm.
They had somebody in the database, Franklin's son, Christopher, who had
Oh.
been convicted of a felony weapons charge in 2008. Well, obviously, he was too young to commit those murders,
Yep.
especially going back to the 80s, right? He wasn't even
Right.
born yet.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
it led him to his dad as a suspect. So now Lonnie Franklin is a suspect because of his son.
Wow.
And they said, we got to figure out how to get his DNA. And
Okay.
I really think this is great.
I love this.
As a cop, I
I
think
love
this
this.
is so cool. Right?
Yes, and you
Tell us about it, Brandy,
I mean, do
because
you
I'm going to get
know
too excited.
I mean, do you know that this is actually how they ended up started tying the serial killer to the yogurt shop murders? So
Yeah.
years ago, right? They found familial DNA. There is this thing, and maybe we can talk about this one day, John, of like when they actually, what is the law if you submit DNA as an independent person, right? You're submitting the DNA And then it ties either you or a family member to that specific crime. So this is why I find this so fascinating, John, is because even though at the time they did not announce who and how they had found the yogurt shop murder, right? Eventually we know it's the DNA, eventually we know. But years ago, people were up in arms and saying, if the FBI knows who committed the yogurt shop murders, why are they not giving the information to the Austin PD? But I find this very satisfying, interesting. I think there are going to be more cases solved in this manner because people are not, well, in this case, his son is convicted and that's why they had it on file. But there are family members who are just willing to give their DNA. And then it starts to tie things back of, you don't know who in your family line's
Right.
giving their DNA, right? So just very fascinating. And I love to see this happening now.
All right, so kind of tell us about it because I get too excited about this one.
Okay. Do you want me to talk about the pizza?
Yes.
Okay, let's do it. Let's do it.
Being Italian, I love pizza. And when
Okay.
pizza can solve not only a murder, but catch a serial killer, it doesn't get any better.
We're all about it. Okay, so we've got an undercover police officer, John, pretending to be a waiter at a restaurant where Franklin was eating. Okay. He was collecting dishes, silverware, glasses, and pizza crust to obtain the DNA. So Franklin's eating, he's touching things, eating on things. Beautiful, right? We see this in other cases. So according to Cooley, detectives then used a piece of discarded pizza along with saliva that is found on the victims to finally establish a DNA match.
I love it. I love it.
Right? Yes, pizza crust.
We've seen it in movies. They use their glass, right, that they've been drinking from. And this one, he was under surveillance. Detectives watched him, watched his routine, waited till they had an opportunity, saw that he had a favorite pizza shop, went to it frequently, and actually had officers in there as waiters to why'd they do this? Integrity of the evidence, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can say we had an LAPD undercover officer personally observe the suspect eating the piece of pizza, personally observed the suspect place the crust into the box, and then the officer and only the officer collected the pizza. The chain of evidence is intact. That's why this is so important, Brandy. You don't have just anyone. You don't just have some, person off the street. You've got to make sure that that chain of evidence is intact. That officer can go to court. He can testify. I personally observed it. I collected the evidence. I brought the evidence in for testing. Here's the bag. Here's the number. Here's the test results. The chain of evidence stays intact that the only one that ate that pizza, the only one whose DNA is on that pizza is Lonnie Franklin Jr. And on July 7th, 2010, he was arrested. And the LADA charged him with 10 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder, and alleged multiple others. That's why I wanted you to describe it. I get so excited. I mean, this is great police work.
John, now, even though he was only convicted or, going to be charged with those 10 counts of murder and that 1 count of attempted murder, John, on December 16, 2010, the LAPD released 180 photos of women that were found in Franklin's home.
Yeah. And investigators actually found over 1,000 photos and hundreds of hours of videotape. And it was all of young Black women, teenage to middle age, often nude, some conscious, some unconscious. So how many more victims? We know about the ones he was convicted of, but how many more were out there? They even at sentencing, right, presented cases and said, we think he's involved with this young woman in 84, 88, in 2000. We think he, was involved in these other crimes in 2005. They actually found some items from deceased victims in his home, but were unable to link them. So the numbers, the 10 murders, the one attempted murder, don't go nearly into what he did. He
Right.
went to trial in February of 2016, and after nearly 3 months was convicted on May 5th and sentenced to death on August 10th, 2016. So he was convicted of those 10 murders and the one the attempted murder, and sentenced to death for it. But remember, he was nicknamed the Grim Sleeper.
Hmm.
Do you remember why?
So because because he went on a 14-year hiatus,
Yeah.
or they thought, without another murder. But then he was nicknamed something else, right, John? There was some other suspicion of him being somewhere else, possibly.
Yes, yes, and you're exactly right. So, we talked about this a little bit earlier.
Uh-huh.
Do serial killers usually take a 14-year hiatus?
No,
I mean, if they were in prison, certainly we could see
sure.
the killing stop. That wasn't the case. But he actually has, or maybe, right? He wasn't convicted of it. The Belize Ripper. Now, why would you tie him to murders in Belize City? Well, it's very interesting that his wife, Castillo, was from Belize, and they police really think that he could be a suspect in the abduction, rape, and murder of 5 young women in Belize City between 1998 and 2000. So part of that 14-year hiatus,
Uh-huh.
because he had connections to that country via his marriage to Sylvia Castillo, who was from Belize. And it was during that 14-year hiatus that these happened. And one of the victim's aunts actually said she saw him in Belize City at the time, and a van used in one of the killings was later found in Belize. So
Wow.
there could be a connection in Belize, but
Wow.
here's here's where I'm filling in the gaps, right? So I firmly believe, yes, if he had, his wife was from there, he went there, he traveled there. During the time he was there, 5 women were abducted and murdered. Simply, that comes together. But most investigators and psychologists say they don't think he was truly inactive. He could
Right.
have done the Belize killings, but they also think, because of the 1,000 or so photos that they found of unidentified women that he kept in his garage, they really believe that he continued to assault, that he continued to kill during the period, but that he disposed of the bodies differently. He
Huh.
used an alternative method. And like I
I
said,
agree.
whether that was incineration and he had access to that facility, whether he dumped them outside of LA, whether he dumped them in an area that's still not found yet, he kept those photos for a reason.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
he could relive his
Hmm.
crimes. And so I
Wow.
think most experts are pretty much on board. When
Uh-huh.
you talk to profilers that, have looked into the case, they say he does fit an organized lust killer. 30s to 50s. He knew the area. He knew residents of the area. He had a criminal history of sexual violence. He had a target group that lived in the area, worked in the area: prostitutes, drug users, crack users. They feel that his crimes were based on power and control and sexual gratification, and
Yeah.
shooting him in the chest, symbolized that dominance over them.
Uh-huh.
But he kept the photos as trophies, to relive it over and over. We know witnesses said he was with many, many prostitutes over the
Uh-huh.
years. And so he craved power over women. He frequented the prostitutes. He likely had numerous STDs. And for a lot of times, the guys are, you gave me this disease, you're going to pay for it, or you're trash. Or
Uh-huh.
with this guy, I'm the trash collector and I'm taking out the trash.
John, I was thinking about the 14-year hiatus, and even though he may have been in Belize and responsible, we talk about coincidences all the time, right? There's really no coincidence in this. If his wife is from Belize and he happens to be there, statistically, he's probably responsible for them. But I'm thinking about the fact of once he knew in that 14-year hiatus, if the murders were continuing and he was able to dispose of them in a different way, man, like once he felt that, knew that, saw it, was doing it, I can't even imagine, John, how many more victims. I mean, look at all of those photos. I mean, where do you even begin with that? Just unbelievable when I kind of think of what this guy could and was possibly doing during those 14 years.
Yeah, and to me, it goes back to him being a trash, working in
Yeah.
sanitation for all those years. He knew dump sites.
Yeah.
Not only in South Central LA, but all throughout the city, wherever he went with his job. He knew the trash collection sites and the cycles. Maybe he learned a way to bag the bodies in a certain way. We've seen other serial killers. I can't recall the name, but the other one, Kansas City Butcher. He was so lazy, he didn't want to go dispose of victims himself. He cut them up, put them in a trash bag, and left them for the city. Maybe the Grim Sleeper figured out a way, because of his exposure, his job, everything else, to dispose of bodies where he really would kill them and let the sanitation department take care of it, and they never appeared again. So that certainly would explain that 14-year gap for the Grim Sleeper. Even though he was sentenced to death, he did die March 28, 2020 in San Quentin of natural causes. And so he wasn't executed, did die in prison, never got out of prison after he was arrested, after collecting his DNA from the pizza. But I think this is one of those cases, Brandy, that we're going to see DNA used for years to come to identify other victims. If we can find where he dumped them, or where he buried them, or where he disposed of them. If we can possibly find that, I think you're going to find his DNA linked to many, many other murderers, especially during that 14-year hiatus. And I think this Grim Sleeper really should have been called the Garbage Man, because in his mind, I think he was killing women, disposing of them by simply covering them with trash. Now, as we put a cork in this edition of the True Crime and Wine podcast, I want to remind our listeners you can follow us on social media and order the wine off of the links on our social media and the links in our podcast platform for all of the True Crime and Wine brands, so that you can have one of our investigation series wines and profile killers along with Brandy and I in each show. Now, that wraps up our business for today. And of course, I want to thank my co-host, Brandy Diamond. Great job as usual. Love having Brandy on each show. I mean, she just brings so much to the table. Absolutely love it. And of course, our producer, Lauren Bedsole, back in the Corsicana Command Center for making the show possible. And I invite you to join us on the next episode of True Crime and Wine, the podcast where we look at a unique serial killer who was intelligent, philosophical, a talented musician, and even left a death diary for everyone to read. I'm John Matthews. Thanks for joining us today for True Crime and Wine. Salute.